All right, so this is Grace Nordquist. Thank you for coming this morning. Grace was born, I think, after I moved away from Panora. And so she's a youngie, I'm an oldie. And I was in college, and so, obviously following Eileen on Facebook, and then seeing Grace had moved up here. So let's kind of do a little bit of history. So you grew up in church in Panora. So they went to our church in Panora and then ended up at a Fountain of Life Church is the name. So talk a little bit about what are some of your, because I think back, and honestly, like I'm not making up, one of my favorite memories of church when I first became a Christian was seriously Dwayne and his Sunday school classes. It was a time where I was just hungering and thirsting to get to know God more as a new believer. And so that's one of my favorite memories, and me and my brother will occasionally make fun and we'll say that, open your operating, well, just because it was just that time. And so, but as you grew up, what are maybe some of your memories as a kid or a teenager growing up in the church that you just remember fondly?
Yeah, this morning I was thinking about that question, and I think of all the little fun random things. I remember kicking the can in the church parking lot to make homemade ice cream, random things like that, and little, throwing a stone at Goliath as a kid, and the little Bible stories and just little things here and there. But this morning I was like, man, I think the moments that I took for granted growing up were moments that I experienced the presence of God. I can remember weeping as a middle schooler or high schooler, in especially in worship. And I now having friends and even adults who didn't grow up in that, they maybe even never experienced that, and to have experienced that as a young kid is just wow, thank you, God, and thank you to my parents who raised me in a church like that. So really cool.
Yeah, I can think back to several memories at the altar at the church in Panora, just, Sunday nights praying and seeking the Lord at the altar and having some of those amazing moments. So what brought you, obviously you went to Morningside, so is that kind of what brought you? Why did you choose Sioux City of all the schools you could have gone to? Why did you choose Sioux City?
Yeah, so primarily for swimming. I swam at Morningside University, or now it's New University, was college then. And so my first 2 years I went to Iowa Central in Fort Dodge, and so after completing my associate's degree, I transferred to Sioux City to Morningside. And so that's kind of what led me here, and then got my degree in mass communication. And so, and then that's where my mom was like, I think Josh Potter has a church there. You should go say hi. And I was like, who's Josh Potter again? So I was a baby.
Yeah.
So.
So you're on the swim team. You love swimming. So, one of my favorite memories of Panora, too, was the lake. We had Lake Panorama, just always going swimming out the lake and boats and all those fun things that we got to do. So you go to Morningside, and then after you graduate, so mass communications is what you go for. And the more you get to know Grace and just her giftings, it's just incredible to see how God has used her with Time to Revive and some of those things we'll talk about. But so after graduation, you worked for the city, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Downtown Partners. The Downtown
Partners,
area.
okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you worked for them for just a short time, and then you did growth organization, and then you ended up at Youth for Christ.
Yes.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what your role was at Youth for Christ.
Yeah, so I was the community engagement coordinator at Siouxland Youth for Christ, which was an awesome experience, and got to connect with people in the community and just share the organization of Siouxland Youth for Christ, and marketing, events, communication, kind of all of those things. But it was really interesting. When I started there, I wasn't looking for a job. When I worked for Downtown Partners, I was content there, which the Lord is showing me in this season. He didn't call us to be content necessarily. And so I remember multiple people being like, hey, I think you'd really like this job at Youth for Christ. And I was like, oh, thanks, but I'm not looking for a job. And then I was like, wait, Lord, why are a lot of people telling me about this? Yeah. And so then that's when I was started praying about it, and ultimately led me there. And it's really cool now to look back and be my yes then, the yes to go to Youth for Christ is how I met Time to Revive. Yeah. And had I not said yes in that season and been willing to go there then, just the domino effect of the small steps of obedience. So
so it's I look at those as opportunities that God put people in your life to say, hey, you should think about this opportunity. I think you've heard me say it here recently. If you're in a conversation for someone for more than 2 minutes, you should probably consider you're in a divine conversation. And God has something that he wants to get out of that conversation. So God places these people in your life. You're at Youth for Christ. Then as we move forward, we talk at some point, Time to Revive gets introduced to Siouxland. And, for us as pastors, we kind of were on the intro level. They came and said, hey, is this something you guys are interested in doing? Would your churches gather around and help us do what we want to do here in Siouxland? And so we made the decision, yes, that we were on board. We wanted to unite churches together to see Jesus, be proclaimed here in Siouxland. And so that was a great just intro for me. But how did Youth for Christ, how did that get you in the door with Time to Revive?
Yeah, I mean, it really was just like a meeting. They came, they're like, hey, can we meet with you guys? Because Kyle, the founder, actually had an encounter. I think he said yes to Jesus, like at a Youth for Christ event, way back in the day. So Youth for Christ was like on his heart and wanted to meet with us. And I remember sitting in that meeting and being like, why am I in this meeting? Who are these people? Why am I here? Like, what's going on? Obviously, the Lord knew.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just a chance meeting that they came there. And then that's how I got connected, started going to the luncheons and the prayer meetings and the different things leading up to the outreach week. So yeah, definitely it was supposed to be in that place in that time.
Yeah. So I remember, kind of Time to Revive hitting the ground here. And I remember, I think I mentioned this to you the other day, I saw a video. Time to Revive does a lot of videos, testimonies, and things like that. And I saw Grace in a testimony video, and I was like, something's changed. Like I could see God had gotten a hold of her heart for Time to Revive, and I think just God in general had just really grabbed a hold of your heart. And so talk a little bit about how even like Time to Revive was just even a good just spiritual for you, what that meant to you.
Yeah, I think, well, even from the first video they did too, like in the beginning of like, what is revival to you? I was like, I don't think I really knew at the time. And I just kind of like said, whatever came to my heart. And then to the time of now, or at the end of when Time to Revive did the outreach week, I think was even a growing experience. But yeah, it was really cool because leading up to when Time to Revive came, I remember going through this season of after college being like, I'm an adult now, but I don't feel like an adult, but I'm not a college student. I'm like somewhere in between. Like I just felt really, it was a weird season for me. And I graduated in 2020 in the midst of the COVID pandemic, looking for jobs in event planning, which wasn't really happening. So it was just kind of a weird time in my life. And to be honest, I experienced a lot of anxiety, a lot of panic, a lot of just things inside of me that also was because of who I was surrounding myself with. And so when I found a community of believers that started like young people who genuinely wanted to pursue the Lord, like that really changed my life. And so from that time on, then I was like, okay, God, I know there's more. Like you're called, like there's something was stirring inside of me. And so I started praying for boldness in my life. And when you start praying for boldness,
be careful.
I was like, okay. And so it was really cool because after that, I remember being like at a Bible study one time with those young adults. And I was like, guys, we just need to like tell people about Jesus. Like, let's just go to the neighborhood and start knocking on doors. And they were all like, how do we do that? And I was like, I don't know. And so it was really cool that that was all leading up to when Time to Revive came. So I really believe that Time to Revive was an answer to that prayer and equipping me with the boldness to go and share the gospel in my community. So
it's amazing what can happen when you get around people who are seeking the Lord. Even I know my story, I was 18 and then kind of I got involved in a young adult group in Des Moines. And it changed everything. I was going to church for 2 or 3 years, going to church, walking in right when worship started and walking out right when service was over, not building any relationships. And when I started going to young adult ministry, it changed my life too, just getting around other people. And so that's why we say it's so important here to find community, find people around you who can push you, who can pray with you, who can have similar experiences. And so just amazing how God, once again, just reaffirms how he can work in our lives and do those things. So Time to Revive has had a massive impact on your life. For those of you that may not know, Time to Revive came a few years ago, and I'll let you kind of walk through kind of what it looks like. But they came, and just it's this organization out of Texas. They're worldwide, and I know Grace can speak to that too. Just kind of going around the city to different places and sharing their faith. And so it really kind of this Bible and wristband concept that they do. And so Grace will kind of share just a few seconds about that. And then talk about how we go from Time to Revive. They come here, we have Outreach Week, and we've had outreach events since then, I think pretty much every month. To now, you've decided, I love Sioux City, but I'm leaving Sioux City. To now God has called you to go and work with them. And so talk a little bit about what God's done over the last year and a half or so with that.
Yeah, man. It's crazy to think that was like literally a year ago. And I think probably in the spring is when I started going into the different luncheons and meetings they were having. But the week of prayer was in August. And then they had an equipping and training weekend, Labor Day weekend. And then October was kind of the harvest week where we did the outreach. And so, yeah, it's just crazy to think that was a whole year ago. But I remember like when I was talking about, I wanted to share the gospel. I tend to overthink things. My mom I probably get that from her. Thanks. And so, but yeah, I think we tend to overthink the gospel as well. And when Times to Revive came and used like the Bible and the wristband to simply show how simple it is to share the gospel. Like the gospel message in itself is simple. I mean, I was just thinking like Old Testament, New Testament, where do I even begin to share my faith? Yeah. And so I think that's what was really cool about Time to Revive is coming in and saying, hey, all you have to do is go up to people in the community, say, hey, how can I pray for you? Yeah. And then after that opens the door to give them one of the wristbands where every single color has a Bible verse on it. And I'm sure some of you have heard this, have been involved before. But then each Bible verse matches a tab in here where the verse is highlighted. And it just walks through the gospel message. And so it was just really cool. And then especially to do that with believers from all denominations, it's like, hey, there's so many ways to share the gospel, but this is one way that we can do it together, go out in groups and really reach our community. And so to then do that too is like the next step, right? So to think of going up to a stranger and saying, hey, how can I pray for you? Was slightly terrifying. I'm not going to lie. I was like, how are we going to do this?
And you're an outgoing you are an outgoing person, and it can even be challenging for all of us.
Yeah. And so doing that though for an entire week really it radically changed my life. To see people, because the model that we use is to love people where they're at, to listen to their concerns. So when you say, hey, how can I pray for you? Don't just be like, okay, great, let's go. Like sometimes that's all people need is just to be heard. And then in that discerning, okay, God, what are you saying here? Do you want me to share the gospel with them? Do I need to invite them to church or just to grab coffee or lunch, or what does that look like? Yeah. And then the hardest part is to respond to that and do what the Lord is saying, because sometimes it's like you don't know how they're going to respond. You just have to be obedient in that. Yeah. And so to go out and do that, and with other believers and people too, was really helpful, because to do it on your own, it's kind of scary. I mean, it's scary either way, but I don't know. And so just to go out and do that during the week, I have so many stories from that week alone. I never baptized anyone until that week. And the morning they talked about baptism, we went to the riverfront. And there was a mom with her, her daughters weren't there at the time, but she was saying she was interested in getting baptized. And we all just kind of looked at each other and we're like, this is crazy. Like, we literally talked about baptism this morning. So fast forward, long story short, by the end of that day, there's a mobile baptism truck, which sounds crazy, but literally I don't know what you call it, one of those truck bed things.
It looks kind of like a food truck, but there's a baptism in the back. I was at Siouxland Christian in the parade the other day, and they were talking about at the Siouxland Christian parade last year, they had the mobile baptism in it. Which cool. is really neat. So then you guys call the people and say, hey, we got somebody who wants to be baptized. They bring the truck over.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's clear. You can see through it. And so by the end of that day, I ended up baptizing not only the mom, but her 3 daughters as well. And it was just such a cool experience that before this week, I'd never even thought about baptizing someone. Yeah. And so, and then also to then disciple, that is the hard part at the end, right? Now you have a new person in Christ. Yep. How do they walk that out? Again, getting them connected with that community and walking with them through that. And oftentimes that's the hardest part, but that's really Time to Revive's heart as well, is discipling people from all nations. And that's kind of the piece. There's a lot of different tools they have, from Revive School to, just lots of other tools to use that. So that week really, it changed my life. And just to go out in the community now, and as I go to the grocery store, wherever I am, just to see people and stop and say, hey, how can I pray for you today? Yeah. That boldness alone, I did not have that before Time to Revive came. Yeah. And so just to see that change my life is just really cool. So.
Yeah, and what I love, I always, Kyle is the founder of Time to Revive, and just an amazing, anywhere you go with him, I remember eating at restaurants and going with him, no matter where you are, no matter what time of day, no matter what, he always finds someone in every restaurant or gas station to talk to and share the gospel with. It's incredible to just kind of watch it in person and seeing him. And the thing I love about him it isn't just, hey, let's just get people through this wristband program and get people baptized and stuff. It's the heart to get them in a local church, and the importance of being around other believers and learning together. And so that was one of the things I appreciate about Kyle, because he's known all over the world. and yet he goes to a church of under 200 people. And that's what I just appreciated about him, was he could go to probably a big church. He could get his name out there probably faster and all those things, but he just chooses to do that, and been in his church for, I think, close to 20 years. Just a wonderful model for it, and lives it. He doesn't just like do this to sell bracelets and Bibles. This is his life and the work that he does. So at some point, your life is now radically different now, and you have this amazing experience during Harvest Week. And then there's this organization happening every month of, we're going to meet at churches, we're going to go out and share for 2 hours, come back, testimonies, food, worship and prayer, and all this stuff. And so you are one of the main spearheads about that, you and Jill Collins. And so you're organizing all these events, and at some point there's a call to, tell us a little bit about how, whether it was a call from Kyle or however you got this call to, now you're leaving Sioux City to go work for Time to Revive, which will eventually result in some international ministry for you. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so Revive Siouxland continued on, and my role was really the administrative side of things, of just like, okay, how can we organize this and get the information out, people know that it's going on. And so in my mind, I didn't really realize that you could use those administrative gifts to be a missionary. And so I was kind of like, oh, this is really cool, great, Time to Revive is awesome, like I'll do it here. Didn't really know if it would go any further than that. And there was end of the year kind of celebration Zoom call, and that's where they were just talking about what the Lord had done that year in Siouxland and all across the world. And one point that really stuck out to me was college ministry that they want to expand, because that's just such my heart. That was a really critical time in my faith and in my life, and so to pour into the next generation of young people in college was really exciting for me. And I felt the Lord stirring in my heart, but I was like, well, I don't really know what that would look like. And so I just kind of pushed it away. And I talked to my mentor about it, she's on the Time to Revive team. Her and her husband live in Minnesota. And she's the one who was like, I encourage you to just reach out to Kyle and see what he says. And so when I had mentioned, hey, I don't know what this looks like, because I was still at Youth for Christ, and I loved that organization, and that was going to be hard to leave. And then when he said that they really needed administrative help, that's kind of when it was clicked, and I was like, oh, maybe I should look into this more. And so I began praying about it kind of January, and it wasn't until February that I had a couple calls with Kyle. And the first call, just learning of how I could use my administrative gifts for the ministry, really opened my eyes. But it wasn't until the second call that I realized the Lord was calling me to this. And this kind of ties back to the prophetic word that was spoken over me when I was a senior in high school at my church back home in Panora. And there was a guest speaker. His name's Mark Barkley, and he was praying over people and prophesied that I was going to be involved in international communication one day. That I was going to communicate with the nations. And a senior in high school, you're kind of like, I haven't completed Spanish 2, so we'll see. And I thought maybe being a mass comm major, maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. And that was 7 years ago. And it wasn't until this second Zoom call with Kyle, when he was talking about just the international ministry that was expanding. There's Revive School is a 2-year Bible study that goes through how every book of the Bible points to the Messiah. It's been really cool. I'm in the historical books. I think we're at the same time. And so just that's in 86 different nations alone right now. And then they did a crusade this summer in Malawi, Africa. That was just incredible. The fruit they saw from literally calling a nation to repent was just wow. And so when he said that on the call, Grace, I think your role in this really is going to have a bigger impact on our end goal of training leaders for the return of Christ, around the world. And it ultimately could be in Israel someday. And so when he said that prophecy was just, it came back to my mind, and I just started weeping on the call. I was like, wow, that God would use me for something so much bigger than me. I just became overwhelmed. And to think that the Lord could use my administrative gifts, just all those little yeses in that moment. And so that's when I knew, it wasn't if, but when I was going to join this ministry. And then I visited Dallas the next week, and that's when they asked me to relocate, which, again, was really hard, because I'm an Iowa girl, born and raised, didn't really ever think I'd leave the Midwest. But the Lord made it really clear that I was supposed to go in this season.
That's, it's going back to high school, God speaking to you, you're in a place where God could speak to you, and that's why we encourage, people to be in church and bring your kids to church and those things, because you never know what God's going to speak in someone's life. And so, so you're packing up next month and leaving Sioux City. And, the thing about just kind of watching Grace over the last 3 or so years here in Sioux City with everything you've been involved in, and, we've talked about this, is just, not only has God called her, but she just has some giftings that just will suit her so well for this ministry, but life in general. But it's just been cool to watch God's hand on your life over the last few years, and excited to see what He's going to do. So you're leaving mom and dad and everything else, and that's a big move. And so one of the things I was going to have you speak toward this morning is advice. Like, what advice would you give to people when they feel those nudges from the Lord? Some of those nudges are simple, it's, hey, go talk to that person, or it might be, hey, pray for that person, at work, whatever. But when God calls you to do something like this, what advice do you give, or would you give to people who are just, God's asking you to do something, and He's asking you to do something? Like, what would you say to them? How do you process that?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it before, but it's all those little yeses that led to me. There's no way, a year or 2 years ago that if the Lord was like, hey, go move to Dallas and be a missionary, I would have been like, what? No. And so I just think, again, being obedient in whatever it is, if it is the smallest thing of just hey, go and ask them how you can pray for them. Don't quench that, because you never know how God will use that. And I think your obedience too could be this revelation just hit me the other day of your obedience to pray for someone else could be the prayers that family member from whoever across the country is praying for them. And so it's you never know when your little yes will make a big impact. Yeah. And so I would just say, start with the little yeses. And then it's I think as your obedience and you listen to the Lord, He'll use that. He sees that to the point where He's like, okay, Grace, you're ready for this. Are you going to take this next step? And again, it wasn't easy, and I prayed through it. It wasn't I was yep, all right. I'm let me pray about this, Kyle. I don't know, we'll see. But it's just really cool too, even in that, to see how God used other people in my life who had literally, I had a coworker and friend at the time who had a dream when I was in Texas, that I came up to her at work and I was crying and I was like, I need to go. And she had no idea. And I was she told me that when I got back, and I was like, okay, God, I'll go. So it's just, I don't know, really cool to see how God will also use other people in your life to confirm that or push you into that season.
Yeah. Faithful with little, faithful with much. It's something we see all throughout Scripture. And so before we're done, we'll pray for you here in just a few moments. But one of the things that you're involved in and that you're helping, so you've attended Family Worship Center for the last several years, and they're going to be taking a trip to Israel. And so you're kind of, I don't know how much you're involved or helping with that, but it's kind of, obviously it's the church's thing, but it's open to other people who might have an interest in going to Israel too. So I know you're going to extend a little bit of an invitation that we can go if we want to, so I have a little bit of information you want to share about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Family Worship Center is, and I'm helping to plan the trip with, it's called Israel Adventure. And so the guy who does all the tours is a believer. He is teaches a theology or Bible class at a college. And then when he's not doing that, he does the tours in Israel. So it's really cool to know that the person doing the tour is a believer, because sometimes you'll go and it'll be, whoever, and you're like, okay. So it's a 10-day trip, May 30th through June 8th of 2024. And so, open to anyone, churches, if you have family from wherever who would like to attend. Really is going to be a trip of a lifetime to go and see what you've read in Scripture and see it in person. This is where Jesus walked, and they offer baptisms in the Jordan River, and just, really cool experiences like that. So if you're at all interested in attending, we've been doing kind of a monthly payment plan. So the deadline to register is November 15th. Okay. So if you are interested, you can talk to me after service. Family Worship Center, on their website, there's a place that says Israel, and that's where you can sign up for the trip as well. And so, and then it's $4,000 for the entire trip. Okay. And that includes travel, that includes all hotel accommodations, breakfast, dinner, all the tours, all of that. So, yeah.
So I know other, it might be something you might be interested in going to Israel. Make sure you Grace would love to talk with you. She'll be out at the table after the service is over. But obviously we want to support you. You know, it's kind of, like I said, kind of grown in Panora, Iowa, now here in Sioux City. It's just kind of weird how our paths of God has kind of allowed that to happen. And so we want to support you. And so I think we have a slide, but what are the best ways we can support you? Obviously financially, what are some other ways we can support you in this?
Yeah, so obviously I would love your prayers as well, just going into this season, and even right now looking for housing and figuring all of that stuff. So just knowing that I have people back in Sioux City who are praying for me as well is extremely helpful. And then I have like a monthly ministry report that I send out too. So if you want to be on that or follow on social media and Instagram, just all that God's doing through Time to Revive, you can do that as well. But yeah, then I'm fully, I'm responsible for raising my full support. So through the ministry, that is like the big thing in this season too, where the Lord was like, okay, are you going to have faith that's greater than your fears in this? Because that's something new as well. So it's just, and that, you know, logistically, whether it's a monthly gift, a one-time online, or sending a check-in would be such a blessing to me. So, yeah.
Yeah, you're living on now mission support, which is, once again, you think about that 2 years ago, you're thinking, you know, you're going to do this and you're not going to have an income to do it. You're just going to have what people support you at. And so one of the things I love about our church is if you look at the back of the bulletin that you got today, we have a copy of every missionary that we currently support. And a lot of those are global missionaries. Some are local organizations like Youth for Christ and things like that. And so we believe it's God's heart to help missionaries get all over the world, and some do that, like I said, globally. Some do that. We support missionaries who are doing ministry in St. Louis and inner city ministry, and so I've communicated to Grace that we want to start supporting her on a monthly basis. But what I'd like to do today is if you're able to give in an offering today. We'd love for you to be able to do that, just to support Grace and the work that God has called her to do. And so in your chairs, there's a little offering, slip, envelope, just write Grace on it, and we'll make sure that it gets to Grace. If it's $5 or $20, $100, whatever you may be able to give. We just want to support her. Once again, she's one of our own. She's going out. God had brought her to Sioux City for these years, and used her here, and he's got other plans to use here in Texas and around the world, and so we want to support her in that, support what God has called her to do. And so I would love for you, if there's any way you can give this morning, we would truly appreciate it. As you leave today, just give in the black boxes and just write Grace on it so we know that you want it to go to her, and we'll make sure that she gets it today. Well, thank you for coming and being here, and we're proud of you. We're excited. I know I'm just really excited to see what God does, and I know we'll stay in contact through the process. And she'll be out there at her table, and her contact information, she has a Facebook page with her information too, and so you can follow her on all those things. But as she's seated this morning, why don't you give her a hand and just thank her for coming this morning.